What's up guys, Polk here and welcome back to another episode of Poker Hands. Today we're going to be taking a look at a hand played between Dwan and Antonius, and in a way it kind of reminds me of the hand between Antonius and Jamie Gold. Ends up being a pretty similar hand, but on that note, let's go ahead and jump into the action.
Two kings. In comes the re-raise, and this is where Dwan becomes so dangerous when he picks up a real hand. His range is so wide, and everyone at the table has seen him make this exact same move over and over again with all sorts of hands. Patrik smooth calls. Viv gets away.
Good luck, boys.
Our hand begins with Dwan straddling it to $1,200 and Antonius coming in for a raise with pocket tens here in the cutoff. He raises to $4,100, which is a little bit on the big side, but definitely fine. The button, David Pete now likes to call with his ace-3 suited. Really, he can go either way. He can go for a call or 3-bet. I probably prefer a 3-bet with a suited ace, but taking a flop also very reasonable. Now it folds to Dwan in the straddle, and he wakes up with pocket kings. He decides to re-raise to about 20,000, which is definitely the standard size, and it's back over to Antonius. With pocket tens here, you definitely want to call, especially when you're this deep. Try and play some post-flop, and the thing about tens, even though you think you're probably ahead of Dwan in general, if you 4-bet and get action, you're in a tough spot. So I like the call here with pocket tens. Now over to David Pete, and he has ace-3 suited facing a 3-bet. It looks like he might be a little bit shorter than the other players, but I'd still generally like to see him go for the call here. A suited ace getting about 3-1 in position is usually a pretty attractive offer. You know, you're going to call 15K here, 16K here, to play it for a pot about 60,000. So I think you're almost always going to have 25% equity, and being that you're in position, you'll probably overrealize slightly. Anyway, he decides to let it go, and we take a flop.
Oh boy. Just when Dwan looked like he was going to start climbing out of the hole, you get the feeling this one's going to get expensive. Look at how focused Tom Dwan is on Patrik Antonius while waiting for him to act. Looking for any sort of tell. $27,000 to call. He calls the 27,000.
The flop comes queen 10-4 rainbow, and Antonius gets there in a big way. He now has the second nuts with middle set against an overpair. This is the classic you're going to get paid situation. This is where the hand starts to get a little bit weird though. Instead of firing out a continuation bet, Dwan goes ahead and decides to check with his kings, instead electing to go for the check call. Antonius fires out 27,000 and back over to Dwan. Now, I'm a little bit confused why he decided to check here. If you bet, you get action from hands like a queen or some straight draws or a 10, and you're actually okay with some hands having to fold in the flop that can outdraw you on the turn. So I don't really see a lot of value in checking, and it's definitely too deep. You're definitely too deep to go for the check raise. So if you do check, I like the decision to check call. But generally speaking, when you 3-bet and flop over pairs, you should be looking to put a bet out on the flop. By checking, you let your opponent have a chance to catch up. And frankly, you're going to have a lot of spots where you're going to want to bluff here. If you have a hand like 9-8 of spades, like Dwan had in a very similar spot in one of our Poker Hands episodes, you're going to want to be able to bluff with that hand and then also value bet with hands like kings. Anyway, he decides to check. Antonius bets 27,000, and Dwan calls. Let's see the turn.
And hits a set of kings on the turn. This one's gonna get ugly. I would expect a check raise out of Dwan if Patrik fires. And I would expect that as well. Antonius's net worth just went down by at least $59,000.
Come on.
The turn is an offsuit king, putting Antonius in dire straits. He's now been set over setted, and Dur has top set. That said, both players have to be a little bit worried about the developments here. While that king does give Dur top set, ace-jack has now made the nuts, and jack-9 suited has a straight. And those are both very reasonable hands for Antonius to have, particularly in position here. Frankly, we know Antonius is willing to call with these hands out of position, as we learned in that Jamie Gold hand, so it's very safe to assume that both those hands could be in his pre-flop call range. If Dur checks the flop, those could also both be very reasonable hands to bluff with. You have outs to the nuts, you can bluff on some runouts, and when you get there, you can try and get paid. So if I'm Dur, even though I've turned top set, I'm still at least a little bit worried by some hands that could beat me. Additionally, it's not that likely that Antonius has too many hands that can be looking to value bet here on the turn. If he has a hand like ace-queen or queen-jack suited, he's going to want to check the turn back and play some rivers. He might value bet with a hand like ace-king or king-jack if he had elected to bet the flop and if he had elected to flat ace-king pre-flop. All of those things seem a little unlikely. So if I'm Dur, I still think my opponent's probably in a fairly polarized spot, and I'm looking to proceed with some degree of caution. Dur checks to Antonius, and now Antonius decides to bet about 60,000 here on the turn. I like the size, and this line makes a lot of sense. In Antonius' shoes, it looks like Dur will often have a hand like ace-king, maybe some kind of queen, maybe a hand like a 10, possibly a hand like jacks. So you're way ahead with your set, and you're looking to get some value. Now, unfortunately here, when you do have the 10s and bet, you're really hoping to not face a check raise. Because if you bet and your opponent raises, you got to take a step back and think about what can I actually beat. Maybe, and I'm really saying maybe here, a hand like king-queen for value or a hand like jacks as a bluff. Neither one of those hands are really that unlikely, but it's also kind of hard to, it's hard to say, right? Like, are they likely or are they unlikely? It depends who you're playing. Against some tighter players, you're almost never going to see either of those hands. Against Tom Dwan, I think you could definitely potentially see jacks, and you know what? Jacks would actually be a pretty smart bluff here. Let's say you did check call jacks on the flop and you get this turn. Well, you could say, yeah, I'm going to call the turn and play some rivers, but really, what hands are you ahead of with jacks? If your opponent has really any kind of value bet, then he's ahead. And additionally, there's not many hands that can bluff the flop and now didn't get there on the turn. So when you have jacks, they're way less likely to have ace-jack, they're way less likely to have jack-9 suited. So jacks would actually be a very reasonable check call on the flop, looking to check raise the turn. However, other than jacks, I can't really think of any hands that would want to bluff. As far as value bets go, Dur is really saying he has either ace-jack, kings, or it's really hard to see king-queen doing this. It just seems a little bit too thin. So he's really saying he has ace-jack or kings, and I would heavily discount kings, being that should generally be betting the flop. So he's really saying that he has ace-jack. Now, would ace-jack check the flop is another good question. Maybe he'd look to bet with that hand as well. That said, if he is checking hands like kings on the flop, it's pretty safe to assume that he's also going to go for the check call with some hands like ace-jack. So what should Antonius do here with his pocket tens? Well, it's not an easy spot, that's for sure. And I can get behind bet calling. Frankly, it's hard to flop a set and 3-bet pots and let it go. That said, you are 200-ish blinds deep with the straddle here. So, actually, I think you're a little bit more than 200 blinds deep with the straddle here. So you could reason that 10s are one of your worst hands you're going to value bet in the turn. I mean, really the only worst hand you could have, I guess, is either pocket fours or I guess king-queen as well. So you can have a couple of worse hands. So the question is, how often is Tom bluffing, and how often do you have better than tens? Well, if you have ace-jack pre-flop and then also bet all of your ace-jacks in the flop, you actually have a lot of ace-jack for the nuts. That's going to be a very frequent hand. Additionally, you also have jack-9 suited, which isn't as common because you can't have the offsuit variety. However, that's another hand that you can consider that you're going to have in your range. However, now another thing to think about, if your opponent does decide to bluff when they do have pocket jacks, you're going to be way less likely to have the straights when they make a move. So when you think about all of these things, I guess I lean towards a call in Antonius' shoes. That said, it can be reasonable as you get a lot deeper and as you play versus tighter players to start to let these hands go when you know you're going to have the nuts and the second nuts. Also, it's important to remember, guys, straights are a lot more common because there's way more combinations of hands that can make straights. So it's less likely to have sets and more likely to have, straights on these straight boards. That means that the value of sets goes down a bunch when these straights exist. So keep that in mind in the future when you have your sets, that maybe you might be able to get away in some spots. Is this one of them? Probably not. And Antonius calls it off, praying for his one out.
Yes, I have to call. Call.
And that's what disaster looks like.
2 times.
Twice.
Twice.
This is officially the biggest pot in Poker After Dark cash game history, over $561,000, and Patrik has won out twice. Strike one. Strike two. At his peak, Patrik Antonius was the big winner at the table, up over $230,000. And now he's felted.
Thanks for joining me here today for Poker Hands. I will say I am feeling a little bit sick, a little bit out of it, so hopefully that clears up so I can continue to make sure that we get videos out every day. Oh yeah, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.